Hello everyone, welcome back to Unset and Release, and today we're going to talk about a camera that is a little bit different from what I've done in the past. We've already established the fact that older professional cameras like this D700 are pretty good value cameras when it comes to, price to performance and what you actually get with the camera, lots of features and build quality and, ease of life with controls and stuff like that. But we've always compared those older professional cameras with what I would call is, the newer entry-level cameras like the Canon M50s, the Sony A6000 that are in the same price range as those old professional cameras. But what is about the older entry-level cameras? The D700 is from 2008 and it was the second most expensive camera from Nikon's lineup back then. And I have right in front of me the Nikon D60, which is the second most affordable Nikon camera from Nikon's 2008 lineup. So let's go with this and see how it handles, how it holds up 15 years later, and if it's worth getting or not. So before we go into any of the specifications, we need to talk about the pricing. The D700 was around $3,000 when it was released, and you can pick that up for about 300 to 50-ish, like that kind of price range. So we are about at a 90% price reduction compared to when it was released. The D60 is in a similar boat, meaning that it was released at about $750 with a kit lens, and if you didn't buy it with a kit lens, I think it was in the 680, 650 price range, US dollars, and today you can buy it for $50 to $60. So we have the same kind of decrease in price. We have about a 90% decrease. So what are the specifications of the D60, how this camera came to be? First of all, I said it was from 2008, but technically it's a camera that takes components and bodies and stuff like that from other cameras that were released way before it. So technically the body is from the Nikon D40, which was released in 2006, and the sensor is from the Nikon D40X, which was released a few months before the D60. The whole thing about the D40X is that Nikon thought that having the D40 and the D40X being sold at different price points made more people go for the D40 because they didn't think that there was that much of a difference between the two cameras, seeing that the names were very similar. So they discontinued the D40X almost immediately and released the D60, which is essentially the same camera just with a rebadge and two small differences which are very, very minor. But basically the sensor was in the D40X, but before that it was in the D80, and even before that it was in the D200. D200, which is a camera that was released in 2005. So we have technically a 2005 sensor into a 2006 entry-level camera body that was released in 2008. Yes, I know that was quite a mouthful, and that was quite complicated for a camera that is that simple, but that's the way it is. In comparison, the D700 takes a very similar approach of using a body and components that were used by other cameras at the time, just assembling them together. Technically, it's the autofocus system and the body from the Nikon D300, but it's the sensor from Nikon D3. Both of which have been released in 2007, so being released in 2008 is not that old compared to what the D60 is using. So that's like the base thing. When it comes to the specs, as I said, it has the same sensor as the D200, so we have a 10 megapixel CCD sensor that has pretty okay specs in my opinion. In 2008 it wasn't like particularly impressive, I would say. It wasn't super impressive compared to the Canon and Olympus and other brands offering, which were very much in line with that 10 megapixel range, but most of them had transitioned to CMOS, while here it's still CCD. So there is a few consequences to using an older sensor that was made for a 2005 camera. one of the biggest compromises that you will have to make is that there is no video capabilities on that thing. There is also no live view support, so that back screen is only to do review shots and go into the menus and stuff like that. There is no, shooting off the screen. And the rest of the specs being from 2006, like the only thing that is from the D200 and D80 is the sensor. Everything else is from the D40, which was an entry-level camera released in 2006, as I said. So it's very, very entry-level when you think about it. We have a 3-point autofocus system that doesn't really have much versatility. I would say the center focus point is decently reactive and decently accurate, but it's not anything like impressive or anything like that. The autofocus continuous is rather unresponsive. I would say the autofocus single is pretty cool because it snaps on and it's pretty accurate, even if that's such a cheap and small and old camera. But yeah, the autofocus continuous has the same problem as I described in the D1X, if you want to check that video. Basically, when you have like a subject transition from close to infinity or from infinity to close, it takes a big while to catch up, while the D700, the D2H and other cameras are like pretty quick on that thing. Yeah, I think the D200 having the same autofocus system as the D2H would be much faster in that situation as well. And it has a lot more points, like 11 points compared to 3. It's just not comparable. So yeah, the autofocus is usable, but not very performant, if that's the major issue. The frames per second, the shooting, is like kind of the same thing. We have like a 3 frames per second, and if you are shooting RAW, which I highly encourage you to do, you have a 6 RAW files buffer before the camera slows down, which is not very good. Like you have about 2 seconds shooting, which is alright, but I mean at 3 frames per second I would have expected to have more. I know it's a very old and entry-level camera, but still. The thing with these specs is that they don't really matter because the camera is super old and super cheap, like $50, come on. And this is not really where the most compromises have been made on this D60. So, just quickly, I just realized during editing that I did not talk about the viewfinder of the D60. And the viewfinder is very much an entry-level viewfinder. It's pretty small, 90% coverage viewfinder, and it's only a PenSam mirror and not a PenSam prism. So it's definitely not the best viewfinder on the market, and definitely not the best imaging device that you can have, especially if you don't have live view. So yeah, back to the video. I'm going to talk quickly about the sensor. The sensor, as I said, is a 10 megapixel APS-C CCD sensor. So we have, you have a lot of people are craving about CCD sensors with the nice colors and the different renditions and stuff like that compared to CMOS. And this is very much true, I would say, and this applies as well to the D60. The sensor in this camera is pretty good. Like the resolution of 10 megapixel is adequate even in today's market. I'm totally fine using 12 megapixel files from the D700. I am also 100% fine using 10 megapixel files with the D60. Another thing with these photos is that the dynamic range, being a CCD sensor, is quite limited. You have quite a low threshold for highlights, so I would highly encourage you to underexpose your shot rather than overexposing them, because recovering shadows, you will have noise because that's a CCD sensor. That's kind of inherent with that technology on cameras, but you have noise in the shadows, but the highlights, once they are clipped, they are unrecoverable. So definitely protect the highlights more than the shadows, and definitely do bracketing if you can. There is no like built-in bracketing mode, which is bad on that camera, to be honest. Like not having it and having that old CCD sensor is kind of a big issue in my opinion. But yeah, the sensor is alright. When it comes to noise and ISO and stuff like that, at ISO 100 the sensor is pretty clean. You have a little bit of noise, but it's pretty okay. At ISO 200, we start seeing a bit more noise, but that's mostly the same thing. The biggest difference that we'll see is that dynamic range will decrease when you increase your ISO, because that's not a dual gain sensor, that's very much a single gain sensor. So you don't have a dual native ISO or whatever the fuck. So you will never, like, you will always decrease your dynamic range if you increase your ISO. The top native ISO is 1600, and I would say from 400 to 800 it's usable. At 1600 it's very, very noisy. And there is an expandable ISO, the high one setting, that goes to 3200. But just like the other Nikon cameras that have those, I would highly recommend you that you avoid them. Alright. So just speaking about the image quality, uh, I think that's a common theme with all the CCD sensors. When you start getting higher in the ISO ranges, uh, the image starts to become muddy real quick. Like compared to CMOS, I've never had that on CMOS. On CMOS, you have, of course, like a bit of a loss of detail. You have visible noise in the picture, and most of the problems that are coming with it are mostly coming from the camera has a lot less light to work with, and that means that you miss focus. That means that the noise is going to show a lot more and stuff like that. But with the D60, and that also happens with D2H and the D1X, if you get higher ISOs, you are very much like muddying the image to a point where like you are losing a lot more detail than if you were on a CMOS sensor. That's the thing I've been seeing on things like the D700 that has a CMOS sensor, the D7, my dad's D7000 that has a CMOS sensor as well. They are like replying to an increase of ISO much better than any CCD sensors before them, and that's ultimately why the camera industry has shifted from CCD to CMOS in the end. That's for the better dynamic range and noise performance. So all of these technological upgrades, even though from a 2008 camera you would think that you would still have like maybe some decent features like CMOS and stuff like that. No, it's still CCD. You have the good colors, but you have to make sacrifices for them. So it's a good sensor, I would say, if you know what you're doing. But if you are a beginner that that you're looking maybe at like entry-level cameras, cameras that would be a lot cheaper for you to get into photography, I would definitely advise you to maybe increase your budget a little bit or look elsewhere, because if you don't have a bit of photographic experience, it might be hard for you to like completely extract all the performance out of this sensor. And I really think that it would be detrimental for a lot of people. That could lead to a lot of people dropping photography altogether. Now, so I talked about the performance, and we've seen that it's not very good. Now I want to talk about the ergonomics and the build quality. As you can see, the camera is all plastic, right? It's every bit of the camera is plastic. There is not a single piece of metal except the tripod mount. Thankfully, that thing is not plastic. But yeah, it's overall it's alright. I would say I've handled cameras that are built to lesser standard than this. In particular, Canon cameras from this era, they have much thinner plastics. They sound much more hollow, and they really have that thing of like panel gaps, where on this D60 it's absolutely not a problem and not an issue. It feels more like a tool than a toy, and lots of Canon cameras of that time had that problem. Like they really felt like toys in the hand. And this is not a problem on the D60 in my opinion. But that doesn't mean that the camera is perfect, and especially when it comes to the design. As you can see, the grip doesn't have a front dial right here, and the grip also has like kind of a pointy end to it. I don't know if it speaks up quite well on camera, but anyway, the thing with that pointy end is that if you're using like a pretty small lens, you will not have any problem. But if you are using a bigger lens, typically that lens came with a 55-200 zoom lens. This amount of lens weight, okay, this is a plastic telephoto kit lens. this amount of weight will make the grip of the camera dig into your fingers and will become uncomfortable within maybe 10 to 15 minutes, which is not ideal, to be honest. So that's one of the problems of the ergonomics of that thing. The other problem, I would say, is the usability of the controls. So we only have one dial at the rear, like here, and that dial controls everything, meaning that in manual mode, that dial controls the shutter speed, and we have a button here next to the shutter button. We have a combined aperture and exposure compensation button, and in manual mode, this will, like, you press it and you turn the dial and it will change your aperture, and in aperture priority it will change your exposure compensation. Same thing for speed priority, and that redial in aperture priority will change the aperture, obviously. For ISO, there is no ISO button. The only way to change ISO is either to go into the menus, use the D-pad, go into the selected ISO tab and change the ISO there. You don't have any third of a stop increments, it only goes full stops, like 100, 200, 400, etc. And that's rather long and cumbersome. There is one function button, which is right here, next to, just under the flash button setting, and that button you can repurpose to be anything that you want, that the camera allows you, and you can assign that button to ISO. And just like going to the menus, you will not be able to change in third of a stopping increments, which is kind of a problem. There is an AEL AFL button just right to the viewfinder in the back here, as you can see. And this can be repurposed to be an A font button. So you can disable the autofocus action from the shutter button, which is always a nice thing. So you can have a fully back button focusing camera, which is definitely the way I prefer to do it. Or otherwise, it just like acts as an AEL AFL, like the common auto exposure lock, autofocus lock. The card and battery compartments are separated, which is always cool to see, even though it's not really needed on that camera. Come on, focus, nice. So it's not really needed to have that on that camera, but it's nice to see it. It's not weather sealed. It does not have a very powerful. It has a little pop-up flash like that. Alright, so it's always nice to have that kind of thing. But otherwise, it's not a camera that has a lot of features, and this is the major weakness of the D60. Is really like the handling is nothing to write home about. The major perk of the D60 is that it's light and pretty compact, so okay, it's not a very big DSLR camera, and it has an F mount, but this is where there is like the major problem with the D60, is that generally when we are saying, yeah, Nikon F mount, the Nikon F mount generally comes with pretty sweet perks, like very broad compatibility for lenses, like you can put lenses from the film era, you can put lenses with autofocus from the 90s, you can put lenses that are modern and will work. Not here, because we are missing the two features that makes the F-mount a special system, in my opinion. I'm going to show you those features on the D700 that has both of them. So those features are the AI ring around the lens mount right there. Will allow you, if the lens doesn't have a CPU, it will allow you to still know what the aperture is on your lens. I'm going to show some B-roll of it. And it also doesn't have the focus motor that is right there, okay? You can see it move. The focus motor will allow you to drive lenses that require a screwdriver autofocus system, like all the AFD lenses and third-party lenses using the same system. And the AI ring will allow you to have the compatibility with lenses with no CPU in them, as I said. And the D60 doesn't have any of this, so it's basically locked into AFS lenses, which are definitely more expensive, and if they are not more expensive, they are like pretty mediocre kit lenses like this one. So yeah, as a whole, I would say that the D60 is a fairly featureless camera, and it does not have all the features that we expect to see from a Nikon F-mount camera body. Now, in a vacuum, I would say that for $50, the D60 is very much worth the money, because it has usable autofocus, if not great autofocus, but it has good image quality and the ergonomics and handling. Even if they are not perfect, they are manageable and you can make the camera work anyway. Like, it's pretty alright. I've been able to make photos with that camera without too much issues. The problem I have is when we are talking about value. And I talked about other Nikon cameras in the beginning of that video, like the D80, D200. D80, I don't know what's on about this camera, but I haven't found a D80 under like 70, 80 bucks, which is a bit more expensive than the D60 is. And you don't have the AI ring. The only like advantage that you get better autofocus, you get better ergonomics, and you get the internal focus motor, so you have your compatibility with AFD lenses there. But really, if you look closely, especially at websites like MPB, for 50, 60 bucks, which is right in the price tag of the D60, you can get cameras like the D200, which not only has the same sensor as this, it has a better autofocus system, it shoots 5 frames per second with a fairly deep buffer. It has the ability to get CF cards in them, but just like the D700, you can put like an SD card adapter, and it works with SD cards as well, so you don't have like much of a problem there either. And on top of that, it has the AI ring, so it's fully compatible with your vintage lenses. So you have a much bigger camera with better ergonomics, better viewfinder, better autofocus, same sensor, weather sealed, magnesium alloy body, large grip, etc. All the things you would want and you would say, oh yeah, those are good features. You can have them for the same price of a D60, and in that regard, it's not a great value at all. And when you look about it, like, it's another older professional camera than this that just took the spot of the value king. And I mean, that's kind of ironic. I was going to compare that to the D700, because, I mean, technically the D200 in essence is the predecessor of the D200, of the D700, sorry, because it was technically about the same thing that the D2X was, like just 2 less megapixels, but same frame rate, about the same dynamic range, same autofocus system, just in a smaller, cheaper body. That's just the D700 in a nutshell compared to the D3. And yeah, there is nothing that the D60 can do to compete with the D200, in my opinion, except on the area of size and weight. If you're planning on gifting this to, I don't know, a kid or something like that, maybe I would see where the D60 would be a better choice than the D200, which is definitely more professional and a much bigger camera than the D60. But other than that, I mean, I'm gonna be really, really straight with you. I like the D60 because that's my old dad's camera, right? That's the camera that I always seen my dad using for more than 10 years, and I have an emotional connection to that camera. But I also, like, just looking at the things that D60 can do, just not a great camera, man. Like the value that you get out of this is fairly limited, I think, and is just not the best buy. That's just the way it is. Okay, so I've been pushing myself to shoot with the D60 for the last 2 weeks or so. So I'm gonna leave you with, as usual, the gallery of images that I've made with the D60 and a few of the lenses. I've primarily used the Nikon 35mm DX f1.8. If the camera can focus, thank you. I've primarily used that lens on the D60 for the entirety of those 2 weeks, and I'm gonna throw in some older shots that I made with that camera. And yeah, thank you all for watching. Thank you for tuning in again on an older camera that doesn't interest anyone. And I'll see you in the next one. Take care.